Hey y'all, it's me, Nathan, and welcome back to the crime series here on my channel. This series we talk about the different hackers, drug lords, mob bosses, serial killers, and gangs in the United States and also the other parts of the world. But today, we're going to be talking about the leader of the Sicilian Black Hand family in New Orleans, Louisiana, aka Carlos Marcello. Carlos Marcello was born on February 6, 1910 in Tunis, Tunisia. Him and his family later moved in 1911 to America, specifically Louisiana, in 1911 when he was only 11 months old. As a teenager, Marcello got into a lot of serious trouble with the law. In 1929, he had to serve up to 9 years in jail on accounts of assault and robbery charges, including bank robberies and grocery store robberies and holding people up at gunpoint. Once he had gotten out in 1938, he was sentenced back into prison for smuggling and trafficking over 10 kilograms of marijuana at the time, which was highly illegal to do. Now, after this all happened though, he'd become good associates with one of the powerful and most well-known mob families in Louisiana, New Orleans specifically at that time, the Black Hand family. The Black Hand family was a family who did a lot of illegal things such as gambling, prostitutions, and also had a lot of influences in politics in that time frame. But after Marcello had become an associate with them, in 1947 became a lieutenant, which is one of the highest ranks that you can actually be while in a boss family. But at the time though, the boss, Sam aka Silver Dollar Corolla, was deported back to Italy in 1947. After this had happened, with the power and rank that Marcello had, he had become the official boss of this family. Before we get into the actual serious crimes that he had committed, we're going to go back and actually talk about the personal life of him at the time of being a mob boss. Not the crimes he committed, but his own personal life, because we don't ever get to see that kind of stuff. So, in the 1950s, he had people in his gang, such as gangsters, policemen, and also corrupt politicians. But at this time, though, he had also opened up a tavern in the town of Wagamin in New Orleans. It's kind of weird to say, though, the fact that this kind of mob boss would just open up a random restaurant. You would think like, oh no, he's probably being nice to that community. You would be wrong. This tavern was actually a secret headquarters to the Black Hand family at the time, who was later called the Sicilian Black Hand family. At the time, Marcello got bored of the project and left it to his friend, Provino Mosca, who still ran the restaurant until he died of old age, and the restaurant is still run to this day by members who had relatives in that family at the time, which is not something that you really see that often though. Most mob families to go back to where they come from. No, this family stuck with what they grew up with, and so they stuck with the restaurant, and it is still popular today. But enough of all that, we're going to go into the most serious crime that Marcello had committed in his lifetime. But before that, we're going to go into a little bit of backstory of why he did this crime. The crime that I'm going to be talking about is the assassination of the President John F. Kennedy. In 1959, Marcello was actually asked to stand before a judge due to the crimes that he had committed, and on the board at the time was John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy. But Marcello refused to speak due to the Fifth Amendment, because he did not want to speak about it, though, because he didn't think that it was that big of a deal at the time, though, and there was no evidence against him. But in 1961, after John F. Kennedy had become president, John F. Kennedy had sent the FBI to Marcello's house at the time and actually deported him back to Guatemala for not showing a proper birth certificate, which he thought he did not have to show them at the time. In 1962, he had returned back to America after sneaking back into America, specifically New Orleans, the French Quarter area. And at the time, he became friends with a guy who we know as Lee Harvey Oswald, who was known as the main plot master of the John F. Kennedy assassination. But John F. Kennedy at the time and Lee Harvey Oswald's relationship, they didn't know each other, and at the same time, Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing against the president. Which is kind of weird to say, though, that the man who apparently committed this crime had nothing against him, while Marcello, who had so much against him for John F. Kennedy getting him deported, getting him in trouble with federal law, kind of sad to say, though, that he was found not guilty of the crime, but yet a man who was hired to do this with no intentions of even wanting to hurt the president gets life in prison. Which, to me, though, sounds a bit off, though, because it's like, if you were to ask Lee Harvey Oswald, though, which was asked, though, he had nothing against him, though, at the time. But if you were to ask Marcello at the time, though, he would have said that he had a lot against him and wanted him dead because of what he had done to him. But besides all of that, the other crime that he also had committed was actually a lot of bad things with the federal government at the time, though. So, 20 years he had to serve in prison due to bribing a public office, influencing an officer, and also the aid of racketeering. And as I said, he had served 20 years in prison and actually owed $25,000 in fines. He did not serve those full 20 years. He only served about up to a year or two in prison, was released, and later died in his Louisiana home in 1993. Now, it's honestly kind of weird to think about it, though, that this mob boss right here gets into all this serious trouble with federal government, such as racketeering and doing all these things, though, and is also one of the main masterminds behind the assassination of JFK. You would have thought he would have gotten into serious trouble, but no. He got off scot-free with it, though. He didn't get in trouble for it at all, though, while his accomplices got the worst of it, which he was possibly happy about, though, because he was like, you know what? I got away with the crime, though. No evidence was against me, so you know what? It's fine. Who cares? So it's kind of weird to say the fact that this kind of stuff has happened to a mob boss like this, though. Whereas the other bosses, though, if there was like a little bit of evidence found against him, though, immediate life in prison. Immediate fines up to hundreds of thousands, also millions of dollars. He only had to pay $25,000 for bribing a public office, for God's sake. And I'm just thinking, that does not seem right when all these other bosses could have done the same thing and paid up to millions of dollars for it. So it's kind of sad to actually say this, but honestly, it is pretty interesting to have to read about all this, though, because I got to learn a lot more about this, which is also one of the best things about this, though, is because you get to learn not just the crimes he committed, but also just the personal life of him, though, like what he did as a boss, though, and kind of like the nice things he did. So it's pretty interesting to get to learn about this kind of stuff. I hope you learned a lot from this episode, and I will see you next time.